Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin, I want to ask you a simple question. Have you ever noticed how the world often celebrates peace in words, but struggles to protect it in action? We talk about humanity, justice, and compassion, yet when the moment comes to prove it, the decisions of the powerful often take a different direction. Today we are standing at one of those moments. The war in Gaza is not just another conflict. It is a mirror reflecting the truth of our global system, showing us who really holds influence and how far they are willing to go to protect their interests. This is not only about Gaza, not only about America, not even only about the Middle East. This is about the future of international leadership, the role of moral responsibility, and whether the voices of millions suffering can ever be louder than the agendas of the few. I want you to listen to this speech with open eyes and an open heart, because what we are discussing today is not distant news. It is a test of humanity and a lesson for every one of us. Stay with me until the end, because what gets revealed here will challenge the way you see global power, and it might even inspire you to rethink what leadership should mean in our world today. The world stood at a critical juncture when the discussion of a Gaza ceasefire reached the international stage. For millions across the globe, the hope of a truce was not merely political jargon, but a lifeline for civilians trapped in one of the most devastated regions. The anticipation was heavy. People expected that at last there might be a pause in the violence, a breath of relief for families torn apart by airstrikes and shortages of food, water, and medical aid. Yet, when the proposal was rejected, it was not only Gaza that felt the impact, it was the entire global conscience that absorbed the shock. The rejection reverberated far beyond the Middle East, reminding the world that the pursuit of peace is not always straightforward. And often the humanitarian cause becomes entangled in layers of geopolitics. For Europe, for Asia, for Africa, the rejection represented more than a single vote or a political maneuver. It symbolized the fragility of international cooperation and the harsh reality that even in the face of human suffering, nations may prioritize strategy over compassion. The shock was amplified by the fact that the ceasefire had gained overwhelming support from the global community, suggesting a rare moment of unity where humanitarian considerations outweighed political divide. Yet that unity was disrupted, leaving people to question the motives of those who chose to stand against what many viewed as a moral necessity. The images coming out of Gaza, families displaced, hospitals overwhelmed, children caught in the chaos, had already shaken the world. Human rights organizations, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens demanded an end to the violence. In that moment, the ceasefire rejection appeared almost incomprehensible, as though the cries of the innocent were drowned out by the louder voice of political calculation. This disconnect between the suffering of civilians and the decisions of the powerful served as a stark reminder of the imbalance in global governance. The shockwave also extended to the credibility of international institutions. When the majority of nations rallied behind a humanitarian cause only to see it struck down, it fuels frustration and disillusionment with systems that are supposed to safeguard peace. It raises questions: who truly benefits from the prolonging of war? What message is being sent to smaller nations when the will of the many is overridden by the decision of a few? The rejection of the ceasefire, therefore, was not only about Gaza, it was about the moral fabric of global leadership and whether humanity still holds the power to triumph over politics. America's decision to reject the Gaza ceasefire was not an isolated act, but a calculated move rooted in layers of strategic thinking, historical precedent, and geopolitical ambition. To many, it looked like a denial of peace, but beneath the surface, it revealed a deliberate attempt to maintain influence, signal resolve, and shape the future balance of power in the Middle East, and the United States has long been a dominant player in this region, supporting allies, securing economic interests, and projecting military strength. By rejecting a ceasefire that most of the world supported, Washington sent a clear message that its strategic calculations outweigh immediate humanitarian concerns, even when such a decision sparks widespread criticism. The timing of the rejection was just as telling as the act itself. In a period where international opinion is leaning heavily toward humanitarian relief, America chose to take a stand that aligned more with its long-term interests than with global sentiment. This suggests that the U.S. views the conflict not only through the lens of human suffering, but also through the prism of its alliances and its broader vision for regional stability. By standing firm, it reinforced its support for Israel, an ally seen as critical to its Middle Eastern strategy, and simultaneously warned adversaries that American backing would not waver under pressure from global consensus. This move also reflects the domestic dimension of American politics. Decisions on foreign policy are never fully detached from internal pressures, voter bases, and political lobbies. The rejection of the ceasefire may serve to consolidate support among influential groups within the United States. Even when confronted with international disapprovals, it highlights the complex intersections where domestic politics shape global policy and where humanitarian appeals often fall secondary to strategic agendas. Globally, the decision positioned America as a nation willing to act boldly, even controversially, when it perceives its interests or alliances are at stake. This posture sends ripples not only to allies who depend on U.S. backing, but also to rivals who constantly test its resolve. While it provokes criticism from humanitarian voices and nations seeking peace, it simultaneously cements America's image as a power that will not bend easily. Even under overwhelming diplomatic pressure, in this sense, the rejection was less about a single war and more about reaffirming America's role as a decisive, sometimes divisive global leader, determined to assert control over the narrative of conflict and peace. In conclusion, what we're witnessing is not just the rejection of a ceasefire, but the unveiling of how power, strategy, and influence truly shape the world we live in. The suffering in Gaza is real. The humanitarian crisis undeniable. Yet decisions at the highest levels continue to remind us that politics often outweigh compassion. This moment forces us to reflect on where the world is heading, who controls the narrative of peace, and whether global leadership still carries the moral responsibility it so often claims. For Europe, for the Middle East, and for every corner of the globe, this is a lesson. Peace is fragile, and unless nations rise above self-interest, it will remain out of reach. I wish you all good luck in your own journeys to seek truth, to stand for justice, and to never lose faith in humanity's potential to do better. Thank you.